Welcome back to the Let's Talk Vibes podcast, where we speak soul contracts, illuminating the path to higher understanding. We're your hosts, Lauren and Yiannah, and this week we are joined by the fabulous Liz Roberta. Say hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, Liz is the author of Living in Tune with Hay House and a business coach for holistic entrepreneurs in the wellness space who want to grow their business the feminine way. She won the Emerging Voices category in the Kindred Spirit Awards and has been featured in publications such as Metro, Glamour, NYC Journal, Yahoo, and Take a Break magazine. A very accomplished lady we have here today.
I didn't just start, I must say that. I have been here for 6 years.
Yeah. Well, we're obviously going to get into everything that you do as this amazing coach, which is how I know you. I first found your podcast and I heard you talking about your business group. And then I joined. I've been, goodness, in the Electric Biz Babes for, I want to say maybe since October, November, like late last year. So it's definitely been quite a few months. And that's how one of our first early guests that we had on the podcast, Stephanie Lynn, that's how she and I knew each other, was having found each other in that group. So yeah, it's definitely full circle
Yay.
have you here now.
I love that so much. And that is one of my favorite things is bringing communities together, bringing women together. So hearing that makes my heart so happy. You have no idea.
Aw. And audience, everybody listening and watching, just so you know, we're doing an episode today where neither Yiannah and I have looked at Liz's chart. So we're going to do a very guessing episode, which I think is going to be fun. And we definitely invite all of you as you're listening. If you want to take notes with us, hey, I know I'm going to take notes as I'm listening, but just to have those mental guesses. And at the end, we're going to go through and take a look at what is actually in your chart. So, without further ado, why don't you take us back to really your childhood? Did you come from a spiritual household? Did you have your spiritual gifts awaken online from an early age, or take us back?
Yeah, really good question. So I always went to Christian schools and we would
Mm.
say the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day. I used to be in the choir and I also played flute in the orchestra. And because I went to religious schools, we were linked to a church. So we would do choir, not rehearsals, choir concerts. I don't really know what you call it. It was within a church ceremony with choir would be in it, same with the orchestra. So the church was always a part of my life. My brother actually went to university to do biology, but later became a vicar. So he's a vicar.
Wow.
My mum's worn a gold cross around her neck for my entire life. But that said, my mum is also a witch. So if you were to see her, she has this long black
Oh,
curly hair. She always wears black. Halloween is her favorite time of year. And she is really a half and half. And she feels conflicted because she says, I'm so jealous of you, me, and William, my brother, because you're both so certain of your spirituality. She feels like she's half Christian, half spiritual. She reads Hay House books that I give her. She's extremely psychic and intuitive. She is vegetarian, into all the supplements, and very much a kind of natural remedy type person and into well-being and all those kind of things. So she never had the kind of interest that I do now, because obviously having Instagram, social media, it was very easy for me to immerse myself in it. She never had that. Had she had the opportunity earlier on, maybe she would have gone down this same path because she is so naturally connected and interested. So that was the environment that I grew up in. And even when I was really young, I can remember in year 6, which is the same as grade 6 in the US, I used to do spells in my bedroom. I want to make a boy in my class like me. So I would do a love spell and I would literally spend my pocket money walking into town with a shopping list that said pink candle, rose essence, like lavender
That's
incense.
I
amazing.
love that.
I was just so sure that it worked. I had no doubt at all that I could make things happen. I could change my reality. I had this little folder of spells that I used to cut out and keep, and I found it recently, and it had a pagan wheel of all the holidays, things like the solstices and Halloween and all these things, and their kind of pagan meanings. And I had that from primary school and I'd forgotten about it and then just found it about 20 years later. So I was always naturally very interested. But then when I went into teenagehood, that was my dark night of the soul. So my teenage years
Mm.
into early 20s, that was the darkest time in my whole entire life. But luckily, my friend had introduced me to tarot at 14. So while I was in depression, eating disorders, anxiety disorders, I couldn't connect with my intuition or anything like that. I was just trying to get through the day. I was in toxic relationships, all that good stuff. And so all I had at that time was my tarot cards. And they would always tell me the truth, and they still do. So I've been reading tarot for over half of my life. I've read tarot for more of my life than I haven't. And it would always tell me what was coming. And so I've had that connection since I was 14. And that really helped me through. I followed a very normal career path. I did an economics degree when I was 18 to 21. And then I was trying to get on a grad scheme at an investment bank. So from the outside, very normal, very average. But in my bedroom, I would read my tarot cards. And I remember one time I left them out on the floor in my university bedroom. Went out to work because I worked in a coffee shop part-time as well, and then got back, and one of my housemates had gone into my room to get something, and I had this panic, and I was so triggered. I was like, "Ooh, oh my God, she would have seen the tarot cards on the floor. They're going to think I'm insane. They're going to think I'm crazy because I didn't tell people because it wasn't the done thing." I think my
Yeah.
friends from school knew, but not at university because they were obviously newer friends. So yeah, it was always this kind of secret passion that I had. And then as I got older, I connected with it more and more and eventually realized I could make it my career by my late 20s.
That's incredible. And it's so
Yeah.
interesting because I did have two preliminary guesses before we even started, just based off of me knowing, about you and what you do. And one of them was the four and the 4 4, because this is about trusting in the flow of abundance from the universe. And just, I mean, even thinking about your book title, Living in Tune, you could almost think of that as like living in flow. I was like, she has to have fours. Like, it's just so much of what you do. And so often, whatever numbers we have as a karmic position in our own charts ends up being what we're here to teach others. So I was like, it might be a karmic four. Who knows? When we look at your chart, we'll see where it is. But I already had this feeling, and just the way that you talked about trusting that these spells would work, I was just like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Those fours are definitely there. And the other number that I guessed was 19-1, and that is really because of your role as a business coach. So the 19-1 is so much about holding space for others to reach their goals. So that's why I thought you might have it. But that one aspect out of the 19-1 is tied to manifestation. And so again, I feel like when you shared about this, oh, I'm doing this love spell, so it's a young kid, it's again that trust of the four and really the manifestation abilities of the one coming through. So I already was feeling like those preliminary guesses, like I'm hearing nods to it.
It's funny because now I don't know you, Liz, right? I don't know anything. I've never taken your program. So for me, listening to your childhood, I immediately went to a 20-2, which is
Same.
that very much like that religious upbringing, like going to Catholic school or church, that is very much like that religion is like a part of life, whether you yourself agree with it or not. It was just part of your upbringing. And then when you said did you say you used to sing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, that's the 3 frequency. That 3 frequency loves to use its voice and share from like the depths of its soul. It connects to music. It's like you probably feel music as you listen to it or sing it. It's like a deep thing. So, but then I thought, well, if you also have a podcast, it's probably a 12-3, not just a 3, because that 12-3 energy loves to use its voice to share, but it's like this expansive energy and it just like goes everywhere. So it always reminds me of that podcast energy. And then you're a little hopeless romantic with your little spell. So I'm like, there's got to be an 8 because that's what I very much associate that 8 with. It's this hopeless romantic. They fantasize about the perfect relationship or the perfect job and the ideal life, all of that. And then you also spoke about, you experienced some body issues, that eating disorder, right? That all of that. So I'm like, that there's got to be an 8 somewhere. The one I question is the 5 frequency, because you brought up anxiety. So the 5 is very ethereal. The 5 taps into the collective energy. So you're processing a lot of other people's stuff, also a lot of other people's fears, whether you realize it or not. And that can show up as anxiety. So definitely something to look at. The only one left is that 7 frequency, which is the Gemini, where you essentially were living this double life. In my bedroom, I was my true authentic self. And in society, I was who I needed to be for the person in front of me. And that is that 7 frequency Gemini energy. It's like that mask. I'm going to show up with whoever I need to be with whoever's in front of me, but you're never going to see who I really am inside until one day you decide, you know what? I'm going to step into my authenticity and this is who I am. And I'm going to show up that way fully. And some people are going to fade out of my life because they're going to think I'm crazy, but that's okay because other people are going to come to me. It's this magnetizing energy, the 7s. So I would be hard pressed to believe that you didn't have those frequencies based on that childhood, what you just shared. I mean, isn't that wild how you can just hear 3 paragraphs worth of content and you're like, boom, boom, like you feel that energy. I know you feel energy, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And that's for me, it's interesting. I did put 5. I didn't honestly pick up on that anxiety part that you picked up on. What made it tick for me was when you mentioned toxic relationships, because that is something that can happen with 5s. I was like, okay, well, this could be 5s. This could also be the 2 that happens with the 2. And so I also, just like Yiannah, as soon as you started talking, I was like, 20-2. I think that's kind of, we almost get trained to it. If you hear that someone kind of had a bit of a religious upbringing and left it, it's like 20-2. Is that there?
Well, and
Oh,
that's really because the person within their frequency, they really love to explore. They love that freedom to decide, to ebb and to flow and to move into who I want to be and what I want to be. But I would also bet that your mother also has one, because for her, it's this tug of war. It's this internal conflict. You know, am I a Christian woman? Am I religious? Or am I this beautiful witch who does X, Y, and Z? And it's like this internal conflict piece where she just can't stand in one or the other. She's pulled in both directions. So that would be interesting to see if she has that.
I know. I mean, same thing. I'm like, well, let's see your mom's chart, because I think she has a 10-1, a 10-1, because that's going between extremes of things, And so it's like, oh, she's not really one thing, but that could also be Gemini, the 7 energy. We've talked about a few things. Well, Liz, let's get now into the part of your story where you do start to create your own business, and with the tarot readings initially. How did you then get eventually into, becoming an author and a coach? So which of those happened actually timeline first? Would you have started coaching before the book came along?
Good question. So when I started this business, I never intended for it to be a business. I'd actually started a previous business, which was selling things on Amazon. So I would get yoga equipment made. I would do amethyst gratitude stones. This is one of them.
Yeah,
So kind of
beautiful.
spiritual wellness things. I would get them made and then I would get them shipped and sold on Amazon. So I started that business while I was still working a full-time corporate job. And then as I was doing that business, I had a website, I had an Instagram. The posts that were doing the best on Instagram were the ones where I was writing, and I'd do an inspirational quote and write a long caption. And they just did 10 times better than everything else. I was also writing a blog for the website every Wednesday and was loving it. I was like, okay, there's something here. There's something happening when I'm writing. And so I got more into that. I unblocked this flow of words and they all just kept coming in every day. I'd be at my office job and walking down the hallway, and then these like paragraphs would just be pouring in and I'd be catching them on my phone. So I started to realize, okay, this note is getting really, really big. And one day I put it on my computer, put it into Microsoft Word to see how many words were there. And there were over 30,000 words of,
Wow.
yeah, sentences, paragraphs that had just channeled in when I wasn't trying. And so then, and I mean, bearing in mind a dissertation I did for my degree and my master's, they were 10,000 words. So to do 3 times more than that, I was like, whoa, okay, this is got to be a book. Surely there's something happening. So actually, when I started this business, I started a new Instagram, a new website with the goal of getting a book deal. So I never intended to have a business. I intended to have a book. And so I went to a Hay House event and they said, you need to have a website, you need to have a blog, you need to grow an audience. And so everything I was doing was just with the goal of getting a book deal. And I did that for a year and a half, unpaid. And then eventually I was like, okay, I need to make some money here. Like I'm spending all this time. I haven't got a book deal yet, still growing my audience, still blogging every week. I want to make some money. What can I do now that will make some money without having to train? And the answer that I got was tarot readings, because as you already know, I'd read tarot forever. So I started offering paid tarot readings, and that was in January of 2020. And then I actually got my book deal in October of 2020, and it came out later in January 2022. I also started coaching in the summer of 2020. So in terms of the order, it was actually all 2020, which is wild to think of. But I started tarot readings in January, coaching in, say, June, and then I got my book deal October of 2020.
That's
Wow.
amazing. Yeah.
And also, I mean, why was this not one of my preliminary guesses, already knowing that you wrote a book to have the 5 and 14
Yeah.
5? Like, of course, I'm like, oh, duh. Like, why
Writer,
did I not
writer
think of this
energy.
right away? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the writer energy. And with the 5, it's very psychic. So like you did talk about a little bit that you can kind of sense energy. I mean, what are your psychic abilities?
So I think my strongest is probably actually clairsentience. And me, my mum, my sister are all big, big feelers. So I had a car accident in 2019 and my mum felt it from a completely different county, nowhere near me. And she said she had this sense of dread all day and she knew something bad had happened to me or was about to happen to me. And someone drove into the back of me and I got whiplash and it was a whole thing and I had to go to A&E, and she felt that in advance. And I'm also a feeler, very sensitive. But the thing that made me realize I was intuitive was actually my ears. So I started to notice that I was tuning into sounds, tuning into words. Now I get taps in my ear, rings in my ear. And when that happens through my ears, I know 100% that it's true, it's a yes. So if I get that response in my ears, then I go off that 100%, regardless of evidence, proof, anything like that. I know if my ears give me the sign, it means it's a yes. So clairaudience, but also very much a feeler as well, clairsentience. And then there's a few others in there, a bit clairvoyant, claircognizant, but mainly the feeling and the ears.
Yeah, those ears, that's definitely the 3s. And Yana was talking about that already because of the music, but the 3 is also associated with the right ear. And I also have 3s in my chart. I have a 12-3 soul destiny. And I also get the ear thing, right? Like when I feel that, that's like, to me, clear spirit communication. Because sometimes other parts of your body, you're like, oh, is that just a body sensation? But like the ears, that to me is always a spirit. Like there's no, oh, that could be something else. It's like, nope, nope, that was spirit chiming in, confirming, making presence known, whatever it might be. So I feel you on that. And that definitely makes me think that you do have those 3s. And, it's interesting with the 8 because that Yana was talking about before that we think you might have already, because the 8 is associated with clairvoyance, but I also really associate it with clairsentience a lot because it's so much associated with the body. And so to me, it feels very natural that that clair sense that's about, that feeling of energy and being present in your body is also associated, for me at least, with the 5 or with the 8. Although I feel like it can maybe be the 5 as well, just that general sensitivity. So I think it can kind of relate to both of those that we already think that you might have.
Oh, for sure. There's no way that it's not in there.
Yeah.
It's definitely there. But it's interesting because the ringing for me doesn't come in like a quick ring for like confirmation. For me, it's one of those really long, really strong, like to me, it almost feels like a tuning fork. Is that the right word? And I'm just like, okay, bring it into the center of my brain and just let it download whatever it needs to download, and the pitch gets so high. Sometimes I feel like I need to go like this, but I know that that doesn't help me because it's already inside. So I don't get it as confirmation. I get it as I know there's information being, and I hate the word downloaded for spirit, but like that's what it's like. So it's like it's so unique the way it shows up differently, but you know that it's there and you know what it means for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to agree about the clairsentience as well. That's why I kind of changed my answer, because I'll get goosebumps and things like that, but it's less reliable because
Yeah.
I can get that for kind of different reasons. And I've had it before. I've gone, oh, that's definitely a yes. And then it's not worked out like that. So I'm not totally sure how that works. Whereas I know for definite when my ears that, yeah, I can rely on it.
Yeah. And so with the book, again, talk to us a little bit about the book material itself, about living in tune. Like what had you lived through and experienced I mean, it does sound like some of it was channeled and downloaded into the Notes app. I relate to that feeling as well. But what were some of the things that really inspired what turned into the book?
So the book is Living in Tune, 21 Questions to Activate Your Intuition and Find Your Life Purpose. And it's based on the whole journey that I went on of trying to figure out what I was meant to be doing, what my career was meant to be, because I always had this massive feeling and that I was meant to do something big and I was ambitious, but then I'd try these different careers and hate them within a few months. So I started investment banking, then I moved into fashion, did a master's in between. And I was so unhappy. I was so miserable. I was so unwell. And again, I felt like I was living that double life and I had to put a face on, a front on, and be a different person just to get through office life, working in teams, working on things that had absolutely no meaning at all and didn't help the world in any way whatsoever. So I really struggled with that, but for many years didn't know what I was meant to do instead. And what unlocked it for me was learning about my intuition, trusting my intuition, realizing it's safe to trust myself. I can do what feels good. If something feels bad, do less of it. If something feels good, do more of it. And it's so simple. But I had never thought like that because I'd been so in my mind, so logical and just following the traditional path. What makes sense? What would be a good idea? What's going to have a good outcome? At no point was I tuning into my heart, my soul, what I'd love, what I'd enjoy. I was always trying to do what was sensible, logical, and practical. And that led me totally down the wrong path. And so I wrote the book to try and help anyone else in that situation, which is very much the kind of masculine point of view, people who are in the masculine energy, to soften and go into themselves, connect with themselves and trust themselves and know that it's okay to just follow that, to live in tune with who they are, to walk their own unique path based on their own inner knowing rather than following the traditional path that society may try and lead them down. And when I did that, I ended up in the career that I love, that I never planned to retire from. It doesn't feel like work. I'm just doing what I enjoy, which is the furthest contrast from when I was in corporate and I was just in a terrible way. I didn't have just the Sunday scaries. It was the Saturday scaries and the Friday night scaries.
Right.
I dread it all. It was awful. And the key was just learning to follow my intuition and be me and do my thing and screw everyone else. I mean, an alternative title we had for the book was Go Your Own Way. The only reason we didn't call it that was because it's a Fleetwood Mac song. So if people Google it, it comes up with Fleetwood Mac, and I'm not going to overdo Fleetwood Mac. So we called it Living in Tune instead. But that gives you a clue as to what it's about. It's about tuning into your own intuition and following that above anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
listen,
100% those
I
fours.
know.
100%.
Oh, the fours? Okay.
Yeah.
Here's what I heard. I heard threes, I heard fives, and then I heard a 10-1. So the fives, as we've talked about, they're so intuitive. That intuition is what leads them and guides them. Okay. But you also talk about following that joy, right? You're like, I need to do the thing that brings me joy. And that's that 3. It wants you to follow the thing that brings you that joy. And that's where that abundance comes in. But it's also about stepping into your self-worth and understanding those 3s and the 4s, understanding like, I can do this. I can put myself out there and be successful and trust that this is going to work out for me. What's really interesting about what you're saying is you're like, I kept trying all these different careers, like nothing fulfilled me. So I kept changing course, if you will. And you said, I always felt like I was meant for something bigger, something more important, like a huge purpose. Now, I may go a little bit on a limb here, but that's very much that 10-1 energy. It's the service soul energy. But when I hear people say that, they almost always have it in a soul destiny position, because they're like, they're people who they're pure service souls. They just want to be of service to others. How can I help? How can I improve? When I see that in a soul destiny, it's also very much like a humanitarian. How can I better this world? And it is the highest frequency energy in all the modality. So as you're sitting here talking about your purpose being this big thing, I don't know what it is, but I know it's something big coming my way. Bless you. That to me, I'm like 10-1, 10-1, 10-1, and it's such a beautiful frequency. I mean, they all are, but it is a beautiful frequency. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but it's interesting that that's hearing that. When I heard that, for me, I was just like, oh, the 14-5, because when you talked about with the book, so 14-5 is known, if they have a 14-5 in soul destiny or in their spiritual goals, that they're going to write a book. You know, the joke is always, you see that someone's chart, it's, what are you thinking of calling your book? You know? So I was just like, the 14-5, because you wrote it. And this is what happens with the 14-5 as well, is that they're on this journey to discover who they are. And then they're going to write about the experience. So I just heard you basically say, I wrote about what I experienced and I wrote it for others. So that to me was very 14-5. And then the part that Yiannah picked up on and thought of it as 10-1, which now that you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. For me, that was the visionary aspect of the 5, because the 5 is this Aries energy and it's very visionary, and they just have, again, this vision. So that's where my mind went when I heard that, was it was confirmation of the 14-5 aspect. And you know, you more and more of the things that you're saying, hearing more of the 8 energy, you know, that non-committal. It could also be a 15-6, which is also an exploratory energy. So it's possible maybe you don't have the 22 20-2, and there's this 15-6, which is also very exploratory. And this 15-6 in particular wants to try on every hat, right? It just wants to keep trying everything on. But the 8 that we've talked about already, it's non-committal. So that not staying in a job could come from the 8. I'm like, it could also maybe come from a 15-6. But, you know, as you talk again about that authentic self, that, you know, when you start to become more of your authentic self, I mean, those 7s are there. And now for me, the question is it a 7-7 or is it a 16-7? And the 16-7, the 16 is the translator. They're able to take these high level topics and put them into plain, explainable language, accessible language. So I sort of feel like with the role that you play, especially with that book, like, hey, let me make this easy for you. It's not as hard as you think. That kind of makes me think, I'm like, well, maybe it's a 16-7 in particular. So we'll have to see.
Liz, are we bombarding you with just a whole bunch of numbers where you're like, I don't know what's happening?
No, I'm making links to my astrology chart because I follow
Yes.
Vedic astrology. And when you just said Aries, I'm an Aries sun.
Yeah.
And when you said about the service, I'm a Virgo moon, and Virgo's all about service as well. So I'm just kind of linking it to that. And I'm just so intrigued. I'm on the edge of my seat to
Yeah.
see
And
if
you
we're
know,
right or not.
the 10 is Virgo. It is related
Okay.
to, it is associated with Virgo. So there you go.
Yeah.
Do you have Scorpio in your chart? Because that the 14 is the
No.
Scorpio. Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, we'll see. You know, the other thing I started to think about as you were talking, because you've emphasized now, you know, in your bio, you talk about with the coaching, the feminine way, and then just when you were speaking about the book, that sort of feminine energy. That's making me think 13-4, because the 13 is the divine feminine. And I actually, as Yiannah was talking then about the 10-1 being in the soul destiny, I thought, oh, you know what? I think that there's something to this, because the 1 is the divine masculine. And so I think there's something about your journey which is helping transition people from this more masculine centered energy into feminine. So I would not be surprised at all to see if we have um a 10-1 and a 13-4 present in your
13-4.
chart.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
13-4 is all about it's that divine feminine, right? And it requires you to sit back in that feminine. And like you, in the corporate world, it's very easy to sit in your masculine, which is that 10-1 energy. That 10-1 energy is that leader. It is that I'm going to get it done. Great work ethic, my way or the highway. I know how to do it better. So let me just do it myself kind of thing. Okay. And it's always doing, where the 13-4 is that divine feminine that says, sit back, relax, and allow yourself to receive. Because you can't receive when you're in your masculine, because you're giving, everything's going out, nothing is coming in. So as you're sitting here writing about sitting in that feminine, obviously, hello, why do we wait this long? That 13 frequency, that's that divine feminine that wants you to just sit in the flow and just wait. Like you're like, they said to you for your book deal, build your audience, get a website, do the thing. And you, in your mind, you're like, I'm going to do what I need to do, but I'm just going to wait for that to come. Right? There was nothing more you're just going to trust and wait that it's going to happen, as it did, which is so beautiful.
Yeah. I get that feedback a lot from people as well, that they have come to me, or the result that they get is going from their masculine to their feminine. They're so wounded from being in the masculine. And then, yeah, so I definitely feel like that might be one.
Yeah. And the thing is too, although the Aries associated with that 5 frequency, the Aries is that leader. The Aries is that doer. Like, I've got this idea and I'm going to go execute and do it like nobody else. So it's hard, especially when you have both of those frequencies, to sit in that feminine, because you're like, I just want to go and do. But then once you sit back on it, it is so beautiful.
Well, with the 12-3 that we think you have as well, the 12, again, we mentioned is expansion, but it's always expanding. It is never wanting to stay still, right? It always wants to move up and move forward and grow all the time, right? It's in this rush. Like I mentioned, I have this as my soul destiny. So the way that I think about it is that it wants everything to happen now, right? It's like it's not patient at all. And so 12-3, it's very much about learning balance. And so that's where we could also, if you, with that 12-3 being present, kind of that balancing even between the masculine and feminine energy, it's kind of coming in and creating part of that element. And I mean, I'm curious for you. Do you feel like you are someone that you really struggle to take that day off? You really struggle to allow yourself to have rest? Has that been something you've had to really learn over the years?
Massively.
Yeah.
Massively. Yeah.
Yeah. That 12-3 is there for sure. Well, what are your tips for all of us who are struggling to juggle the things in our life to be able to like have a little bit of a rest? How do you find rest?
I find that the only way I can do it is if I don't touch my business apps. So I
Yeah.
have something called Saturdates, which means that is, no matter what is going on, that is always fully a day off. And I do not touch any of my apps. And I remember when I first started doing it, I felt anxious. I had this separation anxiety from Instagram. My instinct was to go and check it every few minutes. And so it was really hard at first, but now I look forward to it and I can't wait to have that Saturday, because I know whatever happens, I have that permission to be fully checked out. And it doesn't mean that sometimes I don't have a weekend off or 3 days off or whatever. But for example, before I'd be at a wedding, for example, on a Saturday. And even though I wasn't doing any work, I'd go to the toilet, I'd check my Instagram email. And even though I wouldn't reply to anything, I would just have a look and check in. So I was always plugged in. And then I'd be thinking, oh, I need to reply to that person. And it wasn't productive. I wasn't doing anything, but I wasn't feeling safe enough to step away from my business, and I just hadn't got into that pattern. But once you get used to it, you get into a rhythm and you realize, oh, it's safe to let go. And actually, when you give yourself that space where you don't check into anything, you become so much more creative, and that is when the best ideas come in. And so it's really amazing. It's one of the best things I've ever done, to give myself those Saturdays off, fully off, no matter what, because it creates space, it creates creativity. I have full permission to watch Netflix and do whatever I want to do. I have no to-do list on a Saturday and not feel guilty. Whereas before, I would have a day off, but because I was still kind of checking in, if I was doing things like watching Netflix, I would have this guilt or this anxiety, or oh, I should be doing that. I could be doing that, especially because I love what I do. It's not like a job that I have to do. I enjoy it. It's my hobby as well. So it's really challenging to make that divide, because I like it. It's not something I want to step away from. I enjoy it. But actually stepping away from it for at least a day a week has been the most amazing thing ever. And it's created that separation, which is more of a CEO role, because I'm not just completely in it all the time. I have that time to step away. And then that gives me a different view. And I come back into it feeling refreshed, feeling clearer, and feeling more creative and excited to come back in as well.
You know, it's
100%.
interesting
Yeah.
because in the space that we're all in, the spiritual space, right? And you're providing a service, there is no structure. It's not, you're not 9 to 5 at some office or, you know, some brick and mortar somewhere. You have to make your own schedule. And that means that as your own boss doing your own thing, you can never shut it off. You have to train yourself to give yourself that permission. It's absolutely okay. Just like if you were working a 9 to 5, to take that time for yourself. And sometimes the universe is going to give you that little 2x4 that's like, sit down, relax. You may get, you know, a fever, something where you're like, I just need to sit down and just do nothing. And it's funny because for me, like you, I very much enjoy my work. So I can just do it all day long. My daughter's napping, I'm working. My daughter's sleeping, I'm working. She's with her dad. Like that's what I'm doing all day. And I remember this, especially this last like 2 weeks, things kept happening to me. I lost my car keys. I lost my purse and someone stole it. I got locked out
Oh
of my car.
no.
I know, it's like this whole thing. And then I remember sitting back and going, okay, why is this happening to me? And the answer I heard was, because you're not paying attention. You're rushing, doing, and you're not taking the time to just be still and pay attention with what's going on. Just focus. And I was like, okay. So then yesterday, I did some work. I had some readings, and then I had like a 3-hour span before I was going out. And my instinct was to go, oh, good, I got 3 hours to do some more work. And then I was like, no, you're going to sit on the couch. You're going to watch your reality TV that's been stacked up for how long, and you're going to enjoy it. And you know what? I enjoyed it, and I made myself a bowl of pasta, and I was like in heaven. But it was a beautiful reminder of, I need to do this more regularly because it's good for your sanity, not because, you know, there's not enough work or you're getting unfocused. No, you need that time to breathe and relax and do something, like live your life, not just be immersed in this. This is going to take off. It's going to be just fine. But you have to take care and nurture yourself before you can, you know, give to that. So that's an excellent example and clearly showing up in my life this week.
No, and I feel the same thing. And I really struggle with that a lot too, where I feel like I need a lot of rest time, but then I feel guilty about it. And then, you know, what you hear is then, well, you're not really resting if you're feeling guilty. Like you're not getting the benefit of rest if you haven't sort of given yourself permission to fully embrace that, you know? So I think probably a lot of people listening to this are needing that reminder as well. Like, that it is okay. And I'm still on my journey of finding that full acceptance, but I see myself this year in particular doing so much better than last year of just, yeah, it's okay. You know, it's okay. And when we had our 12-3 episode deep dive, I did talk about, I'm like, I tend to be the type of person where like it's almost like I have a week of going like very nonstop because I'm so in it. It's like I couldn't rest if I tried. Like my brain is just so engaged. And then it's like the next week is when I just like shut down. I'm like, I'm not doing anything because I went very hard last week. And that has kind of tended to be my style a little bit. And I don't know if that will work in the long term, but for right now, it sort of is just how it works. It almost takes too much effort to try and correct that in this moment in time. Like just embrace, that's my flow. That's my cycle, if you will.
Not your cycle.
Well, I'm not that type, you know. I think I have cycles, you know. I'm a moon ruled sign.
Okay, so I have a question. Is this the time we want to confirm
I
the
know. I was just
energies in
thinking
your
that
chart?
should we start to pull these charts up? And you know, I really am thinking, just as you mentioned that creativity, Liz, I'm like, yeah, there's got to be those sixes. I hadn't even thought too much about the six, but it is making me think even more. 15-6. Okay, let's take a look. Let me get that up over here.
So this is your beautiful soul contract chart, but it's not just your birth chart. The first column you see where it says birth name, that's your birth chart. Now, typically it's in, you will see it in like the Star of David, the Merkaba, the way it's laid out, but this is just all piled in physical karma, talents, goals, spiritual karma, talents, goals, and soul destiny. The additional charts that we see here going from left to right are all the names that you've taken on throughout your life. So every time you change your name, for example, your birth name, you had a middle name, but you never introduce yourself as your full name. You always introduce yourself as Elizabeth or Liz. So that creates a common birth name, if you will, okay? So every name that you take on brings in its own set of frequencies. And what they do is your birth name will be like the cake of its life, like of your life. And then each additional name, it's like an extra layer and flavor to the cake that you're infusing into the main taste, the main flavor, the main cake, whatever that is, okay? So these energies are at play. And look at that. Your physical karma is at 12-3, which we talked about, right? That 12-3 is that expansion energy. It is very much also like a burnout energy. I'm just doing so much all the time. I'm always in a rush. I'm always sometimes late. I get FOMO. I want to be a part of everything. My soul wants to do every single thing possible. So I've got like 20 plates going at once. And it's about finding that beautiful balance, like you just talked about, finding that balance of I can work and be successful. I can have a family life and be successful, and I can balance everything and not burn out, right? That's very important. And that 3 energy, which we talked about, you see that image here. It's like it shares from the depths of it, the canal, the depths of the soul. When you share information, you really like feel and believe the thing you're sharing. I wonder too, Liz, if like you ever have moments, maybe you grew up when you were shy. You didn't really speak or share much.
Introverted, yeah.
Introverted, yeah. And then now are you at the point where like you're almost like this emotional volcano where you're like, oh my God, I have this thing I really want to say. And if I don't get it out, I may explode in a beautiful way. And maybe sometimes like over talk people because you're like, I just need to say this thing before I forget.
I wouldn't say that in terms of talking over people, but I share all the time through
Yeah.
my work.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful quality. Your voice is so important for you. And you know what's wild? Lauren, I don't see any 5s here.
I know there's no 14-5, which is interesting. But you know what I am noticing is for that physical triangle, it has the 12-3, the 10-1, and the 13-4, which I did pick up on saying, like, I feel like these energies are working together. And sure enough, there they all are in the physical triangle. So like, Yiannah very rightly picked up on that 10-1 energy, which does show up repeatedly throughout your name.
And as a soul destiny.
From your married name. Yeah. And, that's what I think is interesting, actually. If we do look at those soul destinies, rightly enough, the 2-13-4 soul destinies and the 1-10-1. So again, that those are both this direction that you're heading. When you have a soul destiny number, this is your life purpose and overarching life goal. And it also just, well, that is truly when it's in your birth name. So your true soul destiny is that 7-7. But all these other numbers that show up in the soul destiny position from your other names, they show a direction that you are heading in. And so I think it's very interesting that it is, that 7-7, your life purpose is about, showing up in the world as your authentic self. But it's also, I would say, about helping others to do the same. And it's also very much about forming these heartfelt connections with people and opening your heart and allowing that to be a place where people can come in. That's what we see with that 7-7 as the soul destiny number. And then the other direction that you are heading with then having this 13-4s, the 10-1, and even 11-2. I was kind of wondering if there might be an 11-2 because I kind of picked up on that, not where it was strong, but just as we were talking about, there's no inherent structure to the work that we do. And I was like, well, I do feel like you're kind of creating that. So it does show that you're someone who's helping to create this structure. And it's the soul destiny in one of your common use names, being married, and then also in the physical goals from your common use name from birth. So in that column 20 that you see there. Um, Very interesting. And the other thing that I'm seeing here and that I really noticed, and I'm actually kind of not surprised, is that there's this 21-3 in the spiritual goals from your birth name. So if you look at column 19 there, so the 21 is about doing things the hard way. And the reason I thought you might have it is, even though that's almost in a way antithesis of your brand, if you will, which is let's make it easy, I thought, well, it could be there because that's the starting point. Your journey is about learning to do the easy way because there's this internal part of you that wants to do it the hard way. And it's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do it the hard way. We're not going to do it the hardest way possible. We're going to find the easy way to do this. And you're going to teach others that same thing. So I I'm actually not surprised to see that there. I mean, do you find that you maybe have had that tendency in your life of like doing it the hard way? You've had to train yourself out of that.
Um, I definitely find if I look back over my life, the hardest I've worked, the less money I've made. The less I've worked, the more money I've made. So I was very much in the struggle, had the beliefs around kind of poverty beliefs, you have to work hard and success takes time. And I've had to undo all of those because, yeah, I love hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting also looking at that spiritual triangle, those 8 8s that we talked about so many times, those are very present throughout your chart. Almost every single one of these names, other than just Liz Roberta as, a shorter name, has these 8s all throughout. So that's definitely a big lesson. When we see numbers repeating, it's like a very ongoing lesson. So sometimes, when we look at every every name that a person has used, it kind of can tell you a little bit of a journey based off of when does a number get introduced, that maybe it wasn't there from birth, but it got introduced, after getting married. So that's something that started to get added in, or something disappeared. It's like, okay, you had learned that you didn't really need that continued energy anymore. But when you see something throughout, it's kind of this like ongoing continued focus. And so you do have a lot of these 8s present. So it's not surprising that we kept really picking up on that energy throughout. And I also feel very validated on that 19-1 in that physical karma on that common use name from birth. I was like, I knew it. I knew that was there.
Yeah,
That
well,
holding
and
space for others.
there you go. Yeah. What I find interesting is, so Lauren's talking about these common themes that play out throughout your life, and you have that 4 frequency throughout all but one name. And what's interesting is in your married legal name, you actually brought a ton of it in. And that 4, whether it's a 4-4, a 13-4, or a 22-4, it is all about trusting and having faith in the universe to provide always. And the fact that from a young age, you just trusted and you've continued that journey. You're like, no, that is so strong within me. I hear the sound in my head. I know my next move. I trust that things are going to work out. Things will progress. Things will pan. That is such a huge part of who you are, like literally all across the board. And when we talk about manifestation, you're a manifester. You're manifesting like this, whether you think negative or whether you think positive, you're creating that reality a lot quicker than somebody who potentially doesn't have any 4 frequency in their chart. So as you go 13-4, that's the divine feminine with even like larger abundance, but that 22-4 in your married legal name, in your physical goals, that is generational wealth. That is leaving a legacy. That is about being able to tap into large heaps of abundance. But all of this throughout all your charts, what's really prominent is this self-worth component in the 3s, the 4s, and the 8s. Your self-worth is very much tied to that abundance. And it's like, if you believe you can do it, and if you believe that you are worthy to have and worthy to achieve and all of that, you can, you can create it for yourself. And that's what you're doing. You're stepping into that self-worth. You're stepping into that faith. And you're like, oh, I can do it because I know it's going to happen for me. And it just shows up, which is just so beautiful. So beautiful. Also, as I'm sitting here thinking of your entire, we can't see your legal names on the screen, which is great, but the 5 is the H. Okay. So in your full names, you have 2 H's, right? When you spell out your name. So we do have that 5 frequency. It is prominent. And then that 14 is the N, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah,
it wouldn't be coming through with the H because it's TH, which is gonna not be the 5. That's gonna be more of the 8.
no, the 5 is the H. The 5 is
I
the
know,
H.
but I'm saying in her name, it's always TH. So that's the combination. That's not just the H on itself, but it is
Fine.
with the E's. It is
Listen,
with the E's. Yeah.
yeah, it is definitely that energy is there because your intuition is so strong. That writer energy, which also comes in from that 3, but they're very, very present for you. The only one in your birth name that we actually didn't pick up on was that 21-3, right? You've got your 6s and spiritual talents. That 6 is that creativity. Are you artistic, by the way?
No.
Oh, okay. See, so when I see in a talent position, 9 out of 10 times the person will be like artistic, or that creativity comes out in different ways. Like you, I have that 6 and I can't draw like a heart to save my life. It will be like the worst heart in like history, but my creativity comes from, building, a website or a business or putting, planning a party, an event. That's how that shows up. So there's a very, very creative energy and it needs you to constantly create so you don't get stuck in life. It is very much that Taurus energy. So I can be stubborn and I can be strong-willed. But what's so beautiful about it too is it has this failure component to it, where the 6s are very much afraid to take risks unless they have guaranteed success. And so what you've done is you're just like, I'm going to do my 9 to 5, but I'm going to still build this thing. I'm going to do it. You were like, I don't care what happens. I know it's going to pan out. So you like averted this failure syndrome and you're just like, no, it's going to happen. And I'm going to put the time in. And it came into fruition for you. So that's just so beautiful. I love when you see it play out on somebody who's really in tune with the energies that are going on. And you, Liz, you have no idea what these energies are. And before today, you had no idea about any of this, but it's very much a reflection of how on path you are. Right, Lauren?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you feel like you're on path, yes?
Yeah, I don't plan to do anything else ever
Yeah.
again.
And I know I'm just looking again at, what numbers we thought might be here and what is or what isn't. And it's like, while that 15-6, which I'm a little surprised there's not the 15-6, but we do have those 6 6s there in the birth name. But then you do have 16-7 as spiritual goals in that common use name from birth. So I was like, I knew it. It's like always a nice little like tap, tap, tap on the back, pat on the back when we get those guesses right. The other thing I'm sort of surprised about though is like that 22, it does get introduced through your married name, but it wasn't there in childhood. So we were a little, not to say off, but it wasn't even though you hadn't had that experience, it wasn't really coming through that energy. Although letters of your name,
Right. The R.
yeah,
Yep.
it
So
was
it's
present.
there.
And even the 14 as well coming through the letter
And
N.
yeah.
Yeah, we got a lot here. Well, especially if someone has changed their name, we end up with a lot of charts and a lot of numbers to look at. But it always is very, again, satisfying when you look at the birth name. For anybody who is just listening and not watching, for physical karma in the birth name, we have 12-3, followed by a 10-1 physical talents, 13-4 is physical goals, 8-8 spiritual karma, 6-6 spiritual talents, 21-3 spiritual goals, and 7-7 in the soul destiny. I mean, we really did guess all of those because, again, like I said, I didn't talk about it because I was like, maybe not. I was kind of doubting myself a little bit, but I did pick up on that 21-3. So it's like we really did hit every single one of those, which is amazing. And it just goes to show once you understand these energies, it just becomes so plain as day when you talk to someone.
I want to say, Liz, um, part of the work that we do is we help people optimize their names. And when people take on a new name, they don't realize the energy, the frequency they're bringing with, and how that's going to play out in their chart. So I just want to say that if our teacher Nicholas was here and he got your married legal name, your new optimized name, and he saw those energies, he would be like, done. Right? He'd be like so
Yes.
happy, like we're done. We don't need to do anything else. It's so beautifully optimized with the frequencies that you brought in. So it's almost like, what are the odds, right? You're
Well,
like,
she's in
done.
tune, right?
Yes, totally.
This is living in tune, manifested. I
Yes.
mean, all of those fours are incredible because in that name, you have the 4-4, you have the 13-4, you have the 22-4. And I just had this feeling from the very beginning because when I was doing my preliminary guess and I was like 4-4, and I was like, well, do I think it's 13-4? Do I think it's 22-4? I was like, I don't know. And then I did, the second number that I wrote down once you started talking was 22-4. I just kind of started to pick up on that. And then the 13-4. And so sure enough, in one name alone, you actually do have all of the variations of the 4 energy coming through. That's pretty exciting. And then followed through or accompanied with those 2-10-1s, So like we talked about this like juxtaposition with the 13-4 and the 10-1. That name alone has 2-10-1s and 2-13-4s.
Right. So
I
it's
mean, this
that
is
balance.
really,
It's that
yeah.
balance of that masculine and feminine energy. Right. So, I mean, the fact that you write about that and it's like all over your charts, even in your birth name, it cracks me up because you're just like, people don't realize or understand everything you say, everything you do has sound frequency, and that people pick up on it. That energy is real and it affects your life in a good way, or it could affect your life in a challenging way. And so when we look at people who optimize their names, sometimes like you'll create like a clash where it's like, oh, you're really going to bring that hardship into yourself and you're going to bring that challenge. And it's like, that's why it's so important. But girlfriend, like, get that abundance, get that trust and that faith, that self-worth, sit in it. That is amazing. I love it. I love
I
it.
love that so much. Can I
Yeah.
ask a question?
Yes.
Please.
What does the 8-8 mean? I'm seeing 8-8 in a lot of places, and then it's my spiritual karma from birth.
Yeah. So that 8 frequency is all about it's this clairvoyant energy, right? Which we talked about. It's very much about the body. And it is about grounding. Grounding is very important because the 8s can be very ungrounded because essentially maybe earlier on in life too, you had tough time processing your feelings. It's the Cancer sign that will help you too in astrology, okay? It's the Cancer sign. And what they do is they hold all their feelings in their head and they don't process, and they hold on to everything physically, energetically, mentally, emotionally, the past, people, places, things. They hold on to everything that they have a hard time letting go. But they're also those romantics, those hopeless romantics, and they fantasize, and they have this issue with boundaries. Boundaries is really, really big. Sometimes they overstep. Sometimes they have a tough time setting those boundaries. So stepping into that self-worth is really important to say, you know what? I cannot keep self-sacrificing for somebody else. I have to sit in my self-worth and prioritize myself. I need you to show up here. And if you can't show up here, I wish you the best, but this no longer works for me. And when you sit in that self-worth and you sit in those boundaries, you're actually able to come into a very beautiful feeling of like, I'm home. Because the 8s feel like they're different. They feel like society is a really big thing, but sometimes they feel like they're different from society, right? Kind of like what you went through. You're like, I don't feel like I'm different from everybody here, whether it was your corporate job or your childhood. You're like, I am somebody completely different inside, and nobody understands that. And so the 8s will feel like they have finally arrived at home when they find that tribe, when they find those people that they deeply connect with. And maybe earlier in life that was hard to do. And then once you do, you finally feel like, oh my God, like I feel so good to be here. It feels so good to have this community, because the 8s really need that community to step into. You know, being a part of society is huge. The eights sometimes bring in that depression element too, where because I feel so different, I feel like I don't belong. My thought is, I don't want to be here anymore. So I may want to have thoughts where I'm like, I just want to check out because life is too hard for me. But it's about realizing who you are and accepting that, stepping into that, engaging with society. And really just like once you do that, you just start to feel like this beauty of this frequency. We share the same spiritual karma. So I feel that to my bones. And I grew up feeling very different from everybody else. So I assume, and you'll answer, I assume that you also did.
Yeah.
And so how does the rest of that resonate with you? Because it's throughout your charts.
Yeah. Very interesting. When you said about the community, I build a lot of communities and I've always had really big friendship groups at different phases of like 12 friends, secondary school, primary school. And now I build group programs because I love community. So yeah, definitely resonate.
Yeah, and that will be such a great thing to help you ground, but also your business ground, because it'll ground it into it. The fives, I'm sorry, the fives. Well, the fives too. The fives live in outer space. They're always in that spiritual realm. So grounding for you is so important. It really will shift things in life. You know, so the more you are in society, the more you connect in that way, the more you tap into the beauty of that frequency.
Amazing. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that answer.
Lauren, you want to add anything to that?
I do. And it's just like, some of what you were talking about that made me pick up on you having eights in your chart, Liz, is when you really did talk about being so much in the logic at that earlier time in your life and being so in the logical side and then learning to connect into the intuition, So that for me was one of the really big sort of signs of that energy being present, because that is the lesson. And I mean, Yiannah did touch on this, right? But one of the big lessons for the eight is learning how to move from the head into the heart. And so when you talked on that, I was like, oh, that lesson, I can see that lesson being present there. And then obviously, things that we talked about where we could see that, showing up, that clear sentience, like we mentioned, and, that really feeling in the body and learning to be present in the body. And then that is then something that you are teaching to others as well. Yeah.
Yeah, lessons will come in through the body. So that'll be really important for you to make sure that you feel whole within it, that you take care of your body, because it will show up for you. Like, for example, like that eating disorder when you were younger. That's the whole body. You know, the body's like, I need you to listen to me. And it's like the more you listen to it, the more you connect with it, the stronger off you'll be, and the better like you will feel mentally, physically, like all of that. So, plus that clairvoyance, get a girlfriend. Okay, any other questions before we close out your beautiful chart?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
love it. It's so interesting and such good validation, confirmation, as you said, about dropping from the head to the heart. I see that as a massive part of my purpose because I see the head as the masculine and the heart is more feminine. And that's just so much of the work that I do. So yeah, super interesting. Thank you so much.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Our pleasure. Well, it's been such a joy to have you on the show and to get to hear about your experience and dive into your charts. Thank you so much.
Yes. And Liz, why don't you let our listeners know where they can find you?
Yeah, so I mainly hang out on Instagram. That's my favorite. It's at I am Liz Roberta. My book is called Living in Tune. It's published by Hay House. I have a podcast called The Liz Roberta Show, and my website is lizroberta.com.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Well, everybody head over to Instagram, be part of the conversation as well. Let us know what you thought of this episode. What numbers were you thinking were going to be present in her chart that maybe were or were not? And Instagram for us is going to be the Let's Talk Vibes podcast. And if you'd like to book a reading with either Yiannah or myself, you can do that at the ltvpodcast.com.
And as always, everybody, don't forget to like, share, subscribe to our content. It is the best way to support us, and we greatly appreciate it. Have a beautiful, blessed day. Bye.
Thank you.